But in the meantime, we have a roundtable discussion scheduled. So for those who spoke and are in the room, we can either take the time and have them come up and sit, or we can just ask questions now, and I'll move the mic around and you can ask questions, or people can add additional discussion material for whatever has gone on this morning. So somebody got a hand up?
If you want it recorded, it would be best if people came.
Okay. So Richard, it looks like Joe and Yvonne are not here anymore. They're school teachers, they had to leave. But Serena, Ray, who else? Most people, a lot of the people were on video. So let's see, who was here? Richard, Serena, yeah, Maya, are you still in the room? No. Oh, okay, so Maya will be down in a minute. So why don't we get started on the CLEAN and SECRA. And I'll take it back to David first. You got him up first, and then you had your questions from previously. We can continue with this one. Oh, Josh, okay. All right, this is Josh Macy. He's a professor at the Cornell Environmental Law School. And he's going to be moderating. So, Mr. Professor Dorfman has a question here, so I'll let him take it.
This is a question for the entire panel, but it's actually mostly directed at the Article 78 action that you guys are doing. To what extent is there any kind of science or argument from science from the other side that's being set forth? Going back to Agent Orange and the tobacco lawsuits and all that stuff, there was always arguments from industry regarding causation and all that sort of stuff. Are we seeing even an attempt any longer by industry especially, or representatives of industry in giving a counter scientific narrative about causation or any of that? And then a related question, which is directly for the Article 78 issue, is to what extent are you able to introduce and get the court to listen to, right, your own scientific evidence that you have generated with your own experts, when that was not, since the Article 78 theory is a mandamus theory, you're basically saying that the court below or the agency below did not have the power, essentially, to do what it did. Can you introduce into it new evidence that was not considered before in order to, support your mandamus theory, your Article 78 theory?
This one? Yeah. Well, let me take the last one first. It's very difficult to take reports or evidence from one case and apply it to another case, because the cases are considered sui generis or on their own facts. I know that I remember that was tried in a Third Circuit case, or actually a District Court of Pennsylvania case, and the court absolutely threw it out on the issue of PCBs, where they tried to take it from one case to another. That doesn't mean that reports and studies and other documents can't be used. And usually your expert will rely on epidemiology or whatever else is out there to support their case, hydrogeology studies and things of that sort. Your first question, I find that corporations as a rule are not evil, and they would like not to pollute. but it is also a question of cost. And that's where we get into the common law, where you sue a company that's polluted. For example, in the Love Canal case, where we sued Hooker Chemical and were successful, what we essentially did was make the cost of their pollution higher than the cost of not having this happen again. So the common law is helpful in changing the way corporations approach things in terms of their own engineering. And of course, there's a panoply of federal laws that regulatory laws that may apply as well. Is that your question?
No, you didn't answer either of my questions. So let's get to the second one. In other words, are you seeing a pushback from industry or industry supporters like think tanks and all that, setting forth a different scientific narrative, like what we saw with Agent Orange,
or climate change,
what we saw with the tobacco industry,
yeah,
what we saw with Exxon and their attempts to push back on climate change? Have they, in your experience, are they kind of giving up the ghost on that, of trying to put forth a different scientific theory to, basically allege, well, what you're saying may be true, but it's just as likely that it's happening for another reason, like salinization is happening, naturally rather than before, that sort of thing. That's what I mean.
Yeah. Well, the most obvious example is climate change.
Right.
And the oil industry or the extraction industry continues to challenge climate change, although they don't do it directly. They'll do it indirectly by hiring other scientists. For example, Exxon spent something like $50 billion on a PR campaign and spent $150 billion in new extraction. So clearly there's pushback there, and there has been pushback. Clearly the industry has significant supporters in Congress that will parrot their claims. But on a site-specific issue,
Like the Cargill issue.
yeah, you don't see it on a site-specific issue, just on broad policy issues.
Let me say something. Let me add something to that.
Ray had something.
Yeah, just to add to that, one of the things I alluded to was lack of access to information. So some of the responses we're seeing in affidavits from Cargill's experts will say things like, based on the information available to us, based on the studies available to us, we don't see a problem. But Clean has had great difficulty in getting FOIL responses for a lot of these reports that provide the details that, the devil's often in the details. That's been a real problem. Yeah, I mean, it's been claimed as trade secret confidentiality information, even though New York State, is the owner of the subsurface rights under Cayuga Lake. That maybe was not brought out. This is not privately owned land. It's land belonging to the people of the state of New York that Cargill has a lease to mine.
Another question.
So I just wanted to, I'm moderating this and I want to open this up to questions, but I also want to, since I got some of my students to come, ask a few questions in the aim of making the students in my environmental law class hear a bit about your own experiences and sort of how you went about crafting a career in environmental law. And in particular, I was very interested today to hear about the experiences you guys have had, both in litigation and not in litigation. And one of my students came up to me after we taught standing this semester and said, you know, Justice Scalia, he really seems to dislike plaintiff's attorneys, but he really dislikes environmental plaintiff's attorneys. And so my question, I guess, is, I thought that was a very astute observation, but is when you guys have worked in environmental law, how much do you think about pushback and the fact that environmental attorneys are some of the least favored attorneys by at least parts of the bench, and whether that's something you think about when crafting a sort of theory of a case?
I don't see it much on the state court level. If you're dealing, a lot of these judges haven't had a lot of experience with environmental law, so you're educating them. I generally try to write on a 12-year-old level when I write for a judge. I want to dumb it down and make it as clear and easy as possible. And I don't see pushback from the courts. Occasionally I'll see pushback from my colleagues, conservative colleagues. I remember being at an environmental law conference and one of the lawyers in the audience said the best thing that would happen is if I left Buffalo altogether. On the other hand, many of my colleagues congratulate me for giving them all this business on the defense side. So it's a mixed bag. But I don't see that there are clearly judges that, and certainly administrators, that are developmentally oriented and that are biased against environmental issues in general. But I don't see it as much in the judiciary. When you're at the trial level, you don't get that kind of pushback. As you get up higher, you do see that in appellate courts, and you know, Scalia is obviously biased, always has been in his judicial career, as is a couple of the other Supreme Court justices.
And do you pass them? That's very good.
Thank you. Hi. Maya Van Rossum, again, the Delaware Riverkeeper, leader of the Delaware Riverkeeper Network. We do a lot of litigation. I am an attorney myself, but I have my team of attorneys actually do the litigation day to day at this point. But yes, frankly, we absolutely do see a lot of pushback from the bench, from the administrative law judges on up. Not all the time, it's not uniform, but it is not uncommon for us to go in and not only be outnumbered, right, by the opposition. There'll be the one Delaware Riverkeeper Network attorney, or perhaps one attorney, and you know, I might have two from my staff there, or maybe we have a colleague organization joining us, but inevitably there are 2 to 3 times the number on the other side. So we sort of, as we go in with our preparation, have to contend with the fact that the opposition has more resources. But it is not uncommon, again, from the administrative law judge all the way up, that we will have the justices or the law judges on the bench that are obviously hostile. Cut us off. Don't let us ask our questions. Don't let us finish answering the questions that they have asked. And so a couple things. Yes, when we're preparing to go in for a case, we do look at who's going to be the decision maker. And we do try to get a sense of what are we walking into. Are we walking into a hostile courtroom or not? And you anticipate that, not because you're anticipating that somebody's going to be inappropriately rude to you, which frankly they are, but because you want to have your head on straight. You want to know that that's what's going to happen, and so that you are prepared to be very respectful, right, in how you answer. I know that in one of our cases, it was a FERC pipeline case. We were in the DC Circuit Appellate Court, and one of the 3 justices on the dais went after my attorney, my staff attorney. I swear to you, we counted. I mean, it was like on the order of a dozen times. Because rather than, I think there was one particular word for the pipeline company, he said TGP, right? Tennessee Gas Pipeline Company. Tennessee Gas Pipeline Company refers to themselves as TGP all the time, but they don't like acronyms in the DC Appellate Circuit. So he went after my attorney repeatedly, and Aaron was just fully prepared. Yes, Your Honor, I hear Your Honor, we apologize, right? And like he had his set line, and every time the judge went after him, he just repeated the same line and was very respectful. So, you know, you anticipate it, so you're prepared to have your head on straight to deal with it. So I'm not sure if that answers the way you thought, but.
I just want to add, I think that it can also become a problem if you're looking for consultants to do scientific studies and stuff like that, because they work for industry. And obviously you have the defense bench bar and the plaintiff's bar, and if you choose sides, you may not be able to cross back over. So, especially if you, I bet you could go from being defense to plaintiff pretty easily, but probably not the other way around. I feel like you'd be completely blacklisted. You agree?
It's just, my experience has been that most judges have been very even-handed. I have not had that experience that your lawyers have had, and I practiced in Pennsylvania. Maybe it's because of age or reputation that the courts are a little more respectful of me. They don't want me to have a heart attack in their courtroom or something. Yeah.
So let me ask one more question, and then I'm aware that the greatest sin I could do is go over lunch, but then I'll open it up to questions. One thing that struck me about all of your presentations, which were extremely interesting, but was that they seemed to require at least a minimal amount of funding. And private funding, and so I want to ask about the potential tension and real tension between inequality and distributive justice on the one hand and environmental concerns on the other hand. And so we taught NEPA in environmental law a few weeks ago, and one thing that we had a very lively conversation about this case Hanley, which was a Second Circuit case in which the Second Circuit found that you would consider the environmental effects by looking at the baseline. So the takeaway is that if you're in a more polluted place, it's easier to pollute more. And what I want to sort of ask you is that you guys have all done amazing work, but you've also been able to hire scientists. And whether you think about the sort of possible bad spillovers and negative consequences that some environmental movements can just push pollution to the poorest and most vulnerable communities.
Is your question how we balance?
So a very real example would be in an instance of storing a salination storage facility gets moved away from Seneca Lake and just shunted off into a place where there's already a great deal of pollution. And so my question is, I don't think this is an existential crisis for environmentalism, but it's a very real tension, I think, and all of your presentations sort of brought this issue to the fore, I felt, and so I wanted to let the four of you have an opportunity to talk about that.
Well, to some extent, your question assumes that if you stop a project, it's going to go somewhere else. That's not that doesn't necessarily follow. But in those instances where it does, clearly there are places where certain projects are more in character with the environment than in other places. For example, wind farms. I'm very pro-wind, as any environmentalist is. But if they're too close to homes, there are really significant adverse effects on the homeowners. So that they shouldn't be really close to homes. And there's plenty of places to put a wind farm that isn't really close to homes. So the type of environment that you're dealing with clearly is an issue. Burial of nuclear waste is one outlier because there's nowhere to put nuclear waste. There's no environment where you can put it. Clearly you don't want it in a residential community, but I don't want it in the desert either. You don't want to throw it into space. I mean, there's just nothing you can do with it except stop nuclear power plants so you don't have the waste. And that's one of the major reasons why nuclear power is not a good option, because of the problems with waste.
Yes, if you have something first.
Well, I would just add that, you know, we all need to and try to, I think, work with all communities, not just the ones in the pristine rural areas. So, you know, there's plenty of urban organizations that are very active and organized, and, you know, we all try to support that as well.
Yeah, so at the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, the way we address that is we really think very holistically. So when we take on an issue, right, when we fight against something, we actually do think about where it might end up. For example, when we were fighting against the disposal of VX nerve agent waste in the Delaware River, we were thinking about what might be the next community where it would end up, and actually did outreach to them, anticipating it, trying to help them avoid it themselves. Or in the case of shale gas extraction, drilling and fracking, right? We have protected our beautiful Delaware River watershed from drilling and fracking, but we didn't say, whoops, okay, we won, we're successful for our watershed. We very much thought about what does drilling and fracking mean for other watersheds. We very much believe if we have proven that drilling and fracking isn't safe for the Delaware River and for Delaware River watershed communities, then we've also proven it isn't safe for any watershed or any community, and try to take our successes within the Delaware River watershed to help others, right? But also to think, where might we push, where might this end up? And is that the appropriate other place or not? And certainly an environmental justice community is never the appropriate other place. And so I know the way my organization pursues our work is we anticipate that and try to embrace that community early on as part of the advocacy strategy as well as the litigation strategy. And I do just want to say that's one of the reasons why I so believe in the passage of green amendments in every state across the nation, because the empowerment when it comes to environmental justice is incredibly, incredibly powerful. You really do have every community having the same constitutional right, every individual having the same constitutional right to a healthy environment. And so it is much harder then for an agency to say, well, we've determined that this chemical or this operation isn't safe in this place, in this space, which is much more pristine, but it's okay for this already burdened community to plop it there. I truly believe that green amendments help us take on that argument in an anticipatory way and prevent it, and really enhance the ability of the environmental justice community to be better protected, despite the fact, and in fact, with the Green Amendment, the fact that they are already overburdened, if you have a properly written and placed Green Amendment, should actually result in more protection for them, because the agency must look at and consider cumulative impacts. And if the community is already overburdened, the addition of that one other industrial operation is much more likely to tip you over the edge of becoming an unconstitutional decision, action, or activity. So a Green Amendment actually does, I think, the opposite of what you're saying, which is one of the reasons why they're so powerful. Just one of the many.
I also just wanted to add that I think more could be done. Particularly, we do have private funding, and in communities that don't have that, and you know, that maybe people aren't as aware, I think that could be more outreach and organization building around this issue, because as one of the speakers said, we all are a part of nature. No one's excluded from that.
Another reason why the Green Amendment is so important is that the early environmental law cases in the early 70s and middle 70s attempted to apply the U.S. Constitution, a constitutional right to a clean and healthful environment, or apply natural law that a clean and healthy environment was God-given, and all those cases lost. So if you have something statutorily, you'll be able to make those kinds of arguments.
So would that be yes?
I wanted to address that question you just asked, or the point you just made. I live in a rural, poor community right next door, Cortland County, and we were targeted for a nuclear waste dump by New York State. We were targeted to become the ash landfill for Onondaga County's incinerator ash. We're targeted now to start importing sewer sludge from other places that don't want it because local officials think they can make money on it. So what we do is we dig deep in our pockets, we email everyone we know, we write letters to the editor, we block the roads in the case of the nuclear waste dump and wouldn't let the state on our roads. We followed Governor Mario Cuomo to every single fundraiser that he went to in New York State with big costumes of paper mache heads, cowbells, all kinds of stuff like that. We took our case all the way to the New York United States Supreme Court, but now we're fighting the DEC and town and county and city officials constantly. Every time we put our pencil down because we figure we won a battle, there's another one. And no matter how many times we send out the flow chart for following seeker, no matter how many times we remind them that their project is in fact a type 1 project, no matter how many times we won 2 Article 78s against our town, everyone looks the other way. They grant negative declarations before they even look into any of the impacts, before they even know what the project is. And we found out that the DEC is all too happy to rely on negative declarations that were granted before anyone investigated any of the impacts. And that the DEC is also all too happy to allow segmentation. So basically it's flat out talking to everyone we know. We ran our town attorney out of town, basically, had our knee on his neck for so long that he quit, and we're just trying to replace public officials, like at every chance we get at this point.
We have time for one more question. We have 2 minutes before lunch. Yeah, in the back.
So I'm on the board of the town of Dryden Board, and we've had this recent thing in which we were trying to come up with plans for mitigating and for sustainability. And then we have a very active core of Tea Party sorts who come and fight back every time. So currently this is going on. And I thought that, and this is the question actually, that in talking to them, that the way to phrase environmental is really economic. And that how you frame the question and whether or not you premise your assumptions on climate change made a difference. So it was as if it was an in-their-face battle to say, because you, the committee that was presenting this from the planning board, started off with climate change as your premise, we're going to argue about climate change. Whereas, in fact, what you really have the right to argue about on the town level is little measures about whether or not the planning board is going to require, solar energy considered. And in fact, we have some evidence that builders are building with heat pumps because it's cheaper. So I just wonder how framing that conversation in economics can take the place in some ways of environmental.
So what I always say in all of my public speaking, unless I'm talking about green amendments, but is that I don't care what your personal priority is. I don't care if it's jobs, the economy, family values, education, public health. Whatever is your personal priority, you will always best achieve it if you do it in a way that protects the environment at the same time. And so I agree with you. If the person who you're speaking to cares more about public health, talk about public health. If they care more about the economy, talk about the economy. If it's jobs, talk about jobs. Because that's how they will hear you. And you can always, again, whatever their priority, you can always make a successful case. So that's just being a smart advocate to do it that way. So I applaud you for approaching it the right way to make people listen.
I just wanted to add to that, one of the things that consider when you suggest economic considerations is the external costs. what are the external costs? And if you compare and balance that out, you'll have a good argument, I think.
Yeah, I
That's the
agree.
theory.
Externalities are often overlooked. And I just want constant vigilance. And that's just the bottom line. And you had a question for a long time?
Thank you. I just wanted to actually ask Maya and Serena about the grassroots component to cases that you have worked on, and especially Act 13 in Pennsylvania. How did the grassroots component fit with the legal strategy? And in the Cargill case, was there also grassroots pressure, and do you think that made a difference?
Well, just quickly, because it's almost lunch. The judge in our case was very cognizant of how many people were in the courtroom, and he mentioned it out loud, and he also would explain where we were at in the case and what we were doing to the audience. So he was very much aware of that we were watching him. So I think that made a huge difference in our case, and I'll let you.
Yeah, so it's such a great question. I think environmental activism and grassroots organizing is essential, because the more people you bring to the table and the process during the advocacy stage, the better the record you build upon which you can base your litigation. The more potential arguments you have, and again, arguments that are better framed out. So bringing more people with more information, more data, more perspectives, more photos and facts from what they're seeing in their own local community really can be vitally important to strengthening the litigation case that you can ultimately make. And it makes sure that you have the most compelling people to support standing, because, right, we all say good facts, right, make good law, and part of good facts is that compelling individual that's being harmed, that is your primary or are your primary standing witnesses. So it's hugely, hugely important from a litigation perspective, as well, of course, as a political and an advocacy perspective.
Just one comment, Richard. Just one quick comment. Remember I said that going to court rarely ultimately stops your project cold. Whether or not the project goes forward is almost always a political decision. Going to court gives you the time to let the politics catch up with the facts. So you have to organize. Fighting a battle, an environmental battle, includes politics, the media, and courts.
Okay, so it's lunchtime. Sorry for that.
Oh, that's great.
We will have a little discussion on the media after. And at 1:30, we have the next speaker will be up. So those who registered, I think there's enough food there that if you want to pitch in, you don't have to register, have registered for lunch. We'll be collecting $10 for the lunch on the far end, and then come in and get your food. Thank you.
Okay.